Hi everyone, welcome back to Lair Academy. It's Mickey again, and in this lesson, we're going to continue working on our knowledge base. We're going to be working on our homepage, specifically getting our categories up and running and showing the number of articles within those categories. Let's dive right in by opening up our IDE. Now I've already ran PHP Artisan Makeauth, so we already have a home controller, and if we come down to our routes and we look at web.php, you can see we've already filled in some authentication information. We want to repurpose the home controller and our default route. We're going to be making our default route actually access the home controller itself. Let's go ahead and change this route by getting rid of our closure, and what we want to do is say this route uses, and we're going to use our home controller, and the action that we want to call is index. We'll leave the route name as home as we don't need to change this. Now we need to check out the home controller because there's some default values that are left in there that we're going to have to change. In the construct function of this controller, you can see that we're telling Laravel to use the middleware auth. So currently this means that our users need to be logged in to access any of the functions within this controller. Let's go ahead and remove this because we want users logged in and guests. Down here we have an index function, and currently all it's doing is returning a view to home. Let's make sure that this is right by opening up our views, and we can see we have a home.blade.php. Our first order of business is going to be getting our categories displayed on the screen. So let's jump back to our IDE. And in a previous lesson, we already created the database and the database models. You can see we have a category model here, which will pull in and access our categories. We'll start by creating a default variable. Let's call it categories. We'll access the category model, and let's order by name, and let's make sure we call the get statement so we actually get the categories. Now we also need to tell Laravel what category class to use, so we can come here to the top to say app/models/category. Remember, this namespace is referring to the actual class, so this means that we can go to app, models, and then we have a category.php. Next, we need some way to pass this data into the view. Let's just use the compact function so that we can easily create the variable in Blade and in PHP. We'll say compact, and compact takes a string, and we'll pass it categories. The next thing we're going to have to do is load up our Blade file and start working with our Bootstrap class here. We can minimize this Jumbotron, and you can see we have our categories listed all here, and we'll clean this up. First, I'm just going to skip ahead so I can get my spacing correct. So all I've done is I've tabbed in my category header at the top and just created a row so we can start working. Now what we're going to do is we're going to write a for each statement within Blade here. We'll use the @ symbol and we'll say for each, and we want to say for each of our categories as a chunk. Now let's make sure we have a for end each, and we'll end our row. Now let me explain what we're going to be doing with our chunk here. Because categories comes back as a collection, we can run the function chunk, and we can split it up into a multiple of groups. For example, let's do this in our for each. Let's just come down and let's spit out the chunk itself. So we can do a dd and just chunk. Now if we switch back to our browser and refresh, with that specific chunk, you can see that we have 4 items in this chunk, and they are each our category model. What Laravel is actually doing behind the scene with our collection is it's taking a look at our entire collection and then separating them out into groups of 4. For example, if we switch back to our IDE, we can change the chunk size to say something like 3, and it's going to do the exact same thing, but instead of 4, we're going to have groups of 3. Now let's switch back to our IDE for 1 second. Now instead of showing the chunk, let's actually show what's happening behind the scenes. If we select category and chunk 3, paste it in our die and dump, switch back to Chrome and refresh, you can see that we have our chunks separated out into all of our collections. So you can kind of see what Laravel is doing here. It's making sure each of our groups have 3 items in it. Now that we know that, we can remove our die and dump, and let's write another for each statement. We're going to say for each, and each of our chunk, we're going to go through and assign it as a category, because we're actually working with the category itself and not the array. We'll make sure we add our end for each, and for now, let's just add a column, and let's spit out the category, and let's choose the category name. Let's save this, switch to Chrome, and give it a refresh. Now you can see here we have our categories and they're listed, however they're listed in columns and they're not separated out into the chunks that we specified. And this is just a Bootstrap error, and it's basically switching the row. So right here we'll bring our row down because we want each of our chunks to start a new row, and we'll just clean up our tabs. And now let's save it and refresh. You can see that our categories are now split into the 3 separate chunks that we need. Now there's not much left to do. If we come down, we can see that we're starting our column and heading into our card group. So let's see here. Within this card group, we have a card body. So let's take everything that we have here. And let's paste it in instead of using the category name. We'll just paste everything in there. And let's just clean a few things up. So within the title, instead of using just the title item A, let's actually refer to the category and the category name specifically. And for the articles, we'll just leave as the number 2 for now. Now we don't have a description, but for now, let's just write the word description in here. And we'll come back later and fix this. Finally, we have a anchor tag, and let's end our divs here. We have card body, card, we also have the card group, and we also need one for our column here. Alright, so now that we have our loop, let's actually clear everything else that we have underneath this. And we need to remember that we opened a container here at the top, so let's close our container at the bottom. Let's save our file, switch to Chrome, and refresh. You can see that now we have all the categories in there, and we have our descriptions and links. The only thing we need to do is make our articles work. So let's switch back to our IDE, and let's specifically open up our home controller. Within our controller, you can see we're using the category model, and we're ordering by name and then just getting the categories. If we take a look at the PHP file, we can see we have a relationship for the articles already. Let's tell Laravel to use this relationship by using the with function. So what this is actually going to do, if we dump out categories, switch over to Chrome and refresh, when we drill down into a category, you can see that we have a relations field here, and within that relations, we now have all of the articles. So we can look at a few here, and you can see the articles are being filled in automatically, and Laravel is doing that query for us. So within our Blade file, all we really have to do is refer to the category and refer to the relationship, which is articles, and then use the count function, which will count the number of items in that array. If we refresh, we can see we have our articles, and we know that some have 2. Now, because we're using the relationship in Eloquent, we're not actually looping through each of the categories and running a select statement every time. It's doing it automatically for us, and we don't really have to worry about it. The only time that we may need to worry about it is if we're running into hundreds of thousands of records. But for now, this is pretty good. Now that we have a working homepage, we can say that this lesson is complete. I hope you learned something. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.